Hi all, Marky with the Exiles, another hotel room, another trip, but not to be deterred. Going to try and make another video, so here we go. Now this video is aimed more at our membership, okay? And I'd like to explain a little bit about why we have a group curriculum, and more importantly, why it looks like it does for us. Now, for non-members and anybody else watching this video, thank you, firstly. This, I guess, is an overview of one way, at least, to construct a curriculum in HEMA, or how we've done it and what we feel is important. Now, of course, there are loads of different ways to do something like this. Most clubs have a basis to work from with their training, with developing their students, etc. So, of course, I'm not trying to teach anybody to suck eggs. That being said, if you're a startup, if you're looking to get into HEMA, to instruct HEMA, to start a school, to start a club, then this might be useful. Hopefully it is. Now, this also depends, of course, on the type of pursuit, the type of approach you have to HEMA as well. So what I mean here specifically, in the case of this video, is how we take a working interpretation of a HEMA system and use this as the basis for a working curriculum, specifically in order to develop students into competent martial artists. And that's basically our mission statement as a group anyway. And that's obviously the angle that I'm going to be coming from with this video. Now, from my perspective, in the context of what we do, I'm talking about purists, okay? So we're lucky with the works that we study with Fiore in that we're looking at a relatively complete set of works that are holistic and quite in-depth, and a full system is shown. However, this is not, often not the case, and sometimes, there are approaches where a collection of works are the focus, and clubs try to use them all to develop rounded martial artists. And obviously there's differences to both, but as long as the objective is to develop students into competent martial artists, then it's basically the same approach. Okay, you need a structure for how you develop people, what you want to teach them, or if you run a larger organization with several instructors, a framework for everybody to teach the same, operate the same, so you get the same net result from the people you're trying to develop. So in our case with Fiore, if I was to break this down for the purposes of this discussion, just coming into HEMA, starting to look at Fiore, here's kind of how I would do it. So number one, you might want to translate the works yourself. It's not always applicable, and there's some really, really good translations out there. Back in the day, obviously we felt it was important to have our own, and back then there wasn't anything readily available. As such, there were a few people working on those sort of first translations in parallel, but it's important potentially because when you're dealing with historical Italian as a language, there are a lot of intricacies in that language that have a different meaning to what we sometimes think that they do. Okay, even similar words can have quite different meanings, and when you're dealing with a system where there's text with images, okay, there's a lot in that text that kind of defines and dictates what the image is representing. Okay, so we felt it was really important to have our own translation. It's not entirely necessary these days, but it's a worthwhile pursuit. You can use someone else's, obviously it's your choice, but the specifics of approaching a translation are for a different video. The one thing that this does, though, or certainly one thing that studying the text of the manuscripts does, is give you a real feel and familiarity with the message that it's trying to deliver, either from a technique at a time perspective or a system perspective, background, history, usage, whatever. By absorbing yourself in the text and reading the message, you're remembering what's being said about an action or a principle, which helps you to understand and execute the elements physically as well. So that's kind of number one, is a translation. Element number two is an interpretation of the work. So obviously this is coming from the perspective that you're going to do it as a martial art and not an academic exercise, which is fine, it's just different, and that's not my angle. In terms of interpretation, it's the techniques, the intricacies, the themes of the system, in our case, full system, the history, the social considerations, how it all fits and pulls together. Because, and this is important, because if you're going to do this as a martial art and develop a curriculum, you need a physical basis to work from. Okay, if you're trying to develop people into martial artists, it's a physical pursuit, right? So you need a physical basis to work from. And in my view, there is a difference between an academic study of a system like Fiore and a sort of physical martial study of a system like Fiore. of course they overlap, but both are really important. But again, as I say, I'm coming at this from a physical development perspective as well as mental. So element number 3, I think I mentioned it just before, a philosophy as well. So what do you want to study for? Okay, if you're going to develop a curriculum to develop people, you kind of need to have an underlying philosophy. So as I mention it all the time, I think I mentioned it already, it's to develop martial artists. Okay, we want to train as close as we can in the modern day to a person doing the same system in the period. And that's our mission statement. It's very, very simple. So our curriculum is tailored to that. Okay, now, as I touched on, a curriculum, a structure, how do we take everything that we look at, that we review, that we learn, and how do we set a path for not only what students need to learn, but in our view, of course, but how they learn it as well. And in our case, as we'll discuss, a way to assess that development too, and measure that learning. And it's this element that's the focus of this video, okay, the curriculum element. Again, multiple ways to do this, some good, some not so good. Some people just like to turn up to class and the instructor will just say, hey, we're going to just do some techniques today. Absolutely fine. If that's your thing, no problem. I'm talking about the next phase, okay? The next step up, okay? When you start to get a bit bigger and you want to have something, a basis for everybody to train from. So I'm going to talk about how we do it and what works for us. It might not be for everybody, but it's worked for us and it's worked for a long time. We're always tweaking it, not massively, because we'll talk about that when we cover our gradings. But it's something that we always review. Okay, we're always trying to look at our curriculum because we're also learning as well. Okay, we get closer to the art. We have to change things, especially in the context of our curriculum, because we actually do measure individual application of things like techniques and things like that. So if that technique changes, or our understanding, or the way we do that technique changes, then naturally we need to not only update the curriculum, but we also need to update the instructors that are teaching the curriculum about the way we've improved or changed it. So anyway, it's starting to get a bit complicated. But having a curriculum forms the backbone of our classes and our clubs, okay? It means that every student we have, even when they're separated by a half a globe, has broadly the same approach and method for learning our art, okay? And to be clear, it is our art, okay? It's our take on Fiore's works, okay? We say we do Fiore for ease, but of course we don't, okay? Only he did Fiore. We do our closest take on what we think he was doing, and the idea for us is to always get closer to it, okay? Anyway, our curriculum has 3 main elements, and of course these elements need the most vital extra ingredient, and that's our instructor to make it work, okay? And instructors are the ones that teach things, that bring it to life, that tailor it for the individual. So really, the curriculum is the framework, but it's all down to the quality of our instructors as well. Now, I've done a video previously on what I think constitutes, in my view, a good HEMA instructor, and I've dropped a link to this below. So before we dive into this next section, we break our student and indeed instructor development down into different levels, okay? So we have 8 levels of development within our clubs, within our total organisation. 7 are functional and 1 is reserved, okay? Level 8, the top level, is reserved for Fiore, okay? That might sound a bit silly, but what it does is it reminds us that we're always trying to get closer to the master, okay? We'll never get there. Only he knows his system the way that he intended it to be used. So level 8 is reserved for that reason. But in normal day-to-day terms, we have 7 levels, okay? You come in, you don't have a level, you work towards your level 1 grading, and then you move up through the levels. And when you start getting to level 4, level 5, then you start to become a senior instructor, and so on and so forth. Now, to start off with, our totally new students, either with or without any experience, they are looking at training to take our level 1 grading, okay? Our Primoris grading, okay? And this level is all about building a martial foundation, okay? So Fiore's works are aimed at those already well-versed in combat, or certainly versed in combat. Remember, very different social setup back then. Kids weren't knocking around playing on PlayStations, they were wrestling for fun. So we're looking at a slightly different person as well of the period. But in either case, Fiore's showing you the cool bits, okay? What makes this system work? What makes it different, okay? You don't go to an evening class on classical literature to be taught how to use a pen. And that's kind of, Fiore is the literature class in that analogy. So our students need to be aware of things like how to strike, okay, in the context of the system, how to punch in the context of the system, and also how to apply Fury's unarmed to someone against striking. And I use this as an example. So we have to build this foundation with our level 1 grading, with the level 1 section of our curriculum. We have to fill in the blanks, okay, because there's an assumed level of knowledge, and in the case of the striking, is the example that I use, Fury talks about it. He mentions vulnerable areas. He shows some strikes throughout the system, but he doesn't show you specifically, here's how you do this, here's how you do that, here's how you do the other, okay, because it's working past that level. So we have to fill in those gaps, because we get people coming through our doors that have never done any kind of martial arts before. We need to build a foundation with our level 1 that the system then layers on top of. So we go from level 1 into level 2, and this is now where we start building the system as we do it. And it's a big system, so we have to break it down, okay? So we take elements as building blocks. For example, we take some of the Dagger Masters, some of the first few plays of Largo, the first few plays of Stretto, and we focus on things like that, okay? Because they're principle driven, and we start getting the student used to small but important martial elements of the system. And in level 3 and 4, we build on this. So we introduce more elements of the system, more complex decision-making processes, and so on and so forth. When you start getting up to our level 4, level 5, it's now about rounding the skills off and thinking about the system as a whole. Level 6 focuses on how to use the system and indeed how to teach it as well, because at that point you're starting to, you're a good 10, 12, 15 years in now, and you need to start thinking about how we're developing people to impart this knowledge onto the newer generation and so on and so forth. But basically we very carefully thought about how to layer this system on top of a martial foundation, as I said. Now, how we keep focusing on the various elements is something that we do internally all the time. We're always, again, like any good martial arts club, we're always reviewing what we do and we're always trying to move forward. But we're always trying to develop students in a structured way, and we use building blocks. Basically, learn a technique, drill a technique, learn a collection of techniques, drill those techniques, decide when to do those techniques, look what happens when those techniques fail, what are your other options. That's kind of the layering system that we approach. But of course, we're trying to do that for the whole system. So unarmed and dagger, and sword in one hand, sword in two hands, and so on and so forth. Spear, poleaxe, we have to layer that whole system on. You're not going to start with a poleaxe on your first week with us, okay? Because you need to know how to do the rest of the system, and that will tell you how to use a poleaxe. That's why the poleaxe section is very, very small. And that's how we basically structure our curriculum. So a good way to see this sort of transition and development through the levels is to take just one example, so with Dagger, okay? So with level 1, it's all about basic movement, okay? Attacks and defenses, holding the thing, moving with the thing, applying something from each of the Dagger Masters. So it's all kind of master battle stuff. It's basics, okay? It's an entry into how we want you to use the dagger and how we want you to learn to move with it and apply it and so on and so forth. It's about being comfortable with it. Then we go on to level 2, so it's all about now taking those level 1 lessons and learning the plays, okay? Now, firstly, we do those plays in order from the master. So, for example, the first master dagger, you will literally go play 1, play 2, play 3, play 4, all the way through to 21, okay? You'll learn them in order. So the reason why we do that is because we don't want the student to think about too much. We just want them to execute the play. We don't want them to think about necessarily why they're doing it, although many of them will figure it out, of course, they're smart people. We just want to start building that martial foundation, those plays coming in and coming through. And we're building an understanding of executing the actual plays with as little else to focus on as possible. It's all about muscle memory, learn the play, learn the technique. And we're always drilling with things, okay? So when you start getting to the end of level 1 curriculum, we start drilling with stuff, okay? And I've mentioned all the time in previous videos why we think drilling is so very, very important to learning a physical activity like this. Then we move on to level 3, okay? So we start adding in other elements from the dagger. We now start looking for a higher degree of execution as well. So we have what we call our canon interpretation. Now, our canon interpretation is what all of our instructors agree is exactly how we perform each technique within our school. So it's consistent, it's the same across all of our clubs, okay? And we meet, we review, we send each other videos, etc., etc. So we have one canon interpretation. What we're doing with our student progression is we're always looking for the student to be closer and closer to that canon, okay? So basically, I should execute a first master, first play in exactly the same way as one of our level 2 or level 3 students. They should execute it in exactly the same way that I do, and we should execute it in exactly the same way as an instructor or a student from our US school or whatever. That's important because you're building a curriculum, in our case, where you're going to be measuring people against what you're teaching them. So unless you have something consistent, it's kind of pointless. What we also do with level 3, again using the Dagger example, is we then start to learn some more of the principles and the theory. So distance control, trigger points, recovering safely, when it's right to apply a technique. That all starts coming in the level 3, the level 4, and we basically just keep layering it, okay? But we're not looking for perfect right away. It's all a layering process. And even in the gradings that we do, which I'll talk about in a moment, we are specific to, there's an allowance there, there's a tolerance in there. So if someone's executing a technique and they're level 2, we're not looking for them to execute that technique absolutely perfectly. To our canon interpretation, we're looking for 85%, 90% there. Okay, and if it's completely different, then obviously it's they've failed in the application of that technique, and that's a bad mark across against that part of the grading. Anyway, well, level 4, again, using the Dagger example, it's all about applying the plays in context as well. So under real pressure now, realistic as realistic as we can get to it. And now we're starting to introduce an element of freedom, okay? Because we're not all built the same. We don't all fight the same. Remember, we're not trying to create martial clones. So when you get to level 4, you've drilled every technique, every play in the way that we want you to, but then you start to have some freedom, okay? You start to be able to change things as long as it's within system, My preference with certain techniques is different to other people's preference for certain techniques because I'm different, okay? And that's when we start to introduce that element coming through. And then beyond level 4, into the high levels, the senior instructor levels, the coaching levels, it's all about being completely martial with the Dagger in this example. So full system, 100% canon interpretation, full application, preferential usage, and again, by this point, you've been doing the Dagger for, 5, 10, 12 years, however long it's taken you. So it's a lot of practice and a lot of focus as well. So that's kind of a trend of Dagger development running through the levels, which hopefully gives you an idea of how we structure things and the way that we build things up. So we also have to think, again, it's a holistic system of multiple elements, so we have to think about other things too. For example, if we just focus purely on Dagger, well, at what point do we add in Dagger versus sword? Because again, that's not really something you're going to do on your first year with the club, okay? Because you need to learn a lot of other things before you can start to even think about the last resort of using a Dagger versus a sword. But it's part of the system, so we have to teach it. So we introduced that towards the end of level 2 into level 3. And again, that's an example of the way that we've structured our curriculum, where we fit things in terms of their relevance, in terms of when the student's ready to look at that element of the system. So there's a lot of little elements to our curriculum, but there's sort of 3 main focuses, and I guess this is in closing and this is sort of in summary. So focuses, okay, so I used obviously the example of the Dagger, which I've just gone through, but obviously with your curriculum you need to look at what point the students focus on which bits, okay? As I say, we do it because we break things down into levels, so everything's quite bite-sized, makes it easy for us. Other people use a 4-stage system, Provost, etc. They will structure it for however works for them. What you can't do is try and teach everything at once, okay, and expect perfection straight away. So you need to have focuses when you're looking at developing your curriculum. Our curriculum also has drills as well. Big on drills, as I say. We have very specific set drills that are part of each level, and some of those drills also form the basis for more complicated drills later on. And now it's not that they're just robotically just repeating drills, okay? They're changeable. We introduce elements, With Dagger, we say, you've got a problem with sticking your left arm up in front of things. Let's put that behind your back and carry on doing the drill. We're using the drills all the time to focus on certain aspects of a student's development as well. But our curriculum has drills within it, okay? And the last element is gradings, okay? So yes, as a club, we do gradings. I think lots of clubs do. The main reason we have gradings is to understand at which point someone can focus on the next element of their development, because it's a massive system and we're trying to do it properly. So it takes time to develop, and there's a lot we need to look at before someone's ready to move on. So the next part of the system, that they move on to in terms of the manuscript or the principles that we want to develop in them is kind of benchmarked by the gradings. You pass a grading, you're ready for the next bit. So we focus not just on the content of the level and how things are executed, but we always bear in mind how we grade as well, and that canon approach. Now, Our curriculum is obviously central to everything that we do. It ensures, as I said, consistency, it provides focus, it provides a purpose. In our case, it's measurable, and it ensures that the learning of the people who came before us are passed on to the people that come after us as well. So I've made changes to our curriculum just recently because of the things that I've learned, or people, our group executive have learned, or we've decided to change and tweak, and I would hope that the people who come after me would do exactly the same. So it's a living, breathing thing. As I said earlier, though, what's central to a curriculum is the instructor. The instructor bringing that curriculum to life and focusing on the needs of the individual when it's required, okay? Martial arts is a subjective field. And how we go about ensuring our instructors have the same approach is complicated, but basically stems from everybody learning from the same criteria and going through the same gradings themselves, which all of our instructors have. It also stems from the group executive constantly assessing the abilities of our, and the qualities of our instructors as well, and indeed scrutinising and having scrutiny for ourselves. So that's a little video, and probably a long video now, on a couple of ways to think about things when you structure your curriculum. Obviously, that's as much as I can give away because our curriculum is ours. Okay, so if you want to see it, you have to become a member and become an instructor, etc., etc. It's 2.5 decades in the making. But the one thing I'd say is, creating a curriculum doesn't have to be particularly difficult, especially if you're just starting off or you're a couple of years in. Okay, you can start with something as simple as, with Fiore, for example, I want someone to learn this, this, and this. Okay, and when they've learned that, and that, I want them to learn this, this, and this. Okay, think about that bit, and then also think about how you want them to learn it and how you want them to practice it. Okay, start with those 3 things. As I've just said, maybe you want to break the system down into sections, maybe you want to try and teach the whole thing at once, whatever. But I would very seriously recommend starting that process of having a workable fixed curriculum that you guys can work to. Bit of a ramble, but still, hopefully it was at least useful. Enough from me, I guess, for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time.